Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Jobin, and you are listening to Time to Talk, a podcast for caregivers. This podcast is dedicated to helping family caregivers in Ontario. Through expert tips and resources, you will gain knowledge and validation for the ups and downs that come with caregiving. More importantly, you'll learn that you're not alone. It's so important to take this time for yourself. We're glad you're here. Today's guest is Dr. Paul Wheatley-Price, a thoracic medical oncologist who has been with Lung Cancer Canada for over a decade. Beyond his clinical work, he hosts Lung Cancer Canada's podcast, creating space for important conversations around the disease. Dr. Wheatley-Price also leads the Novartis Oncology Young Canadian Investigator Awards, which honors and supports emerging cancer researchers. Lung cancer has touched both his professional and personal life, and he has faced the disease within his own family. Dr. Wheatley-Price has years of experience walking alongside patients and their loved ones, guiding them in moments of hope and the difficult realities of the disease. Thank you so much for joining us today, Paul. And I wanted to kick things off by saying this is a really personal episode for me as well. So I think we're going to have some common touch points in this story because my own dad had lung cancer. So there's lots to talk about here. And I think, if I'm being absolutely honest, this is probably the episode that I needed 10 years ago. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I'm really thankful for you being here with us today.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. And, it's probably not surprising that lots of people listening to this will have been touched by lung cancer because it's the most commonly diagnosed cancer in Canada, 32,000 cases this year, which means if you go into any room with more than 10 people, it's likely that there'll be a number of people that will have had members of their family who have been diagnosed with lung cancer. And because it's a bad disease, it means a lot of them have lost family members, and that's what's happened in our family in the last, just in the last 6 months. Yeah.
I'm so sorry to hear that. It's unfortunate that we have this in common, but I think our shared conversations, our shared experience in this conversation is going to create that space for probably those 1 or 2 in 10 people in that room that have been touched by this disease. So I did want to kick things off talking about your personal connection. Obviously, you have a very professional connection as well, but to lung cancer and caregiving. Can you tell us a little bit more? You mentioned just in the last 6 months, but your personal experience with lung cancer.
My lung cancer story goes back 2 decades from when I was training to be an oncologist in the UK, and my sort of first rotations, if you like, in my training were with lung cancer, and I got comfortable with it, and I just instinctively sort of liked the average kind of lung cancer patient, and down to earth and no nonsense and just getting on with it type approach. And of course, lung cancer affects the full range of society, but there's a sort of there was a sort of stereotype which appealed to me. Then I married a Canadian. That's why I'm in Canada, Michelle. And her aunt and uncle, who were probably closest to us amongst her extended family, her aunt was diagnosed with lung cancer in Quebec a few years ago, and we, they're the kind of the aunt and uncle that we spend all our time with, long weekends and holidays and summer, and we see a lot of them. Yeah, so I became her sort of unofficial advisor, but I would be the person in her family who she could call just for help to interpret a scan result, or does this sound okay? In a sense, that's nice for her because most people don't have a lung cancer oncologist on tap, if you like.
Absolutely.
So she did well for many years, and then things went south very rapidly in the fall, in the summer and fall. It's difficult, isn't it, to say something like that is easy, but I think it was probably easier for me than it was for a lot of other members of our family because I kind of could see what was happening. And so none of it really was a shock to me. It was a sadness, of course, but it's something that I guess I'd maybe emotionally prepared for in a way that some other family members, despite me trying to, bring the family along, and it all happened quite quickly at the end, which we think was a blessing. She was struggling at the end, and she passed away ultimately quite peacefully and quite quickly, and that was good.
I know it's
You know what I mean?
yeah, I know what you mean. It's how do you choose that word, right?
Well, we've reflected on it as a family that the trajectory of her health, she was very out of breath, not able to do the things she enjoys. She had high expectations for her levels of activity and expectations that she wasn't able to meet anymore.
I understand your hesitation with sort of choosing that word, because it's like, how do you affix that word to that situation? But I also maybe have been experiencing something, having been in the experience of something similar. I also sort of know what you mean as well.
It's funny because it's definitely, I think, helped me be a better doctor, having seen it from a different angle. And good is very much a reflection of not just me, but I think of our family, in that, when someone you love, is dying, and then you just don't want them to suffer. We saw with her the pattern of what was going to happen, and she was sort of released from that. So in that sense, the timing was good.
I would say that my own, personal experience with my dad, things happened a lot more rapidly. We had maybe not even quite 6 months, I think,
Right.
from diagnosis to when he passed away. So it was very accelerated, and I also had a newborn at the time. So there was a lot all at once. It's a lot all at once in and of itself. But when you throw that into the mix, and I think while I'm hearing you talk about that situation, I'm thinking back to all the appointments that I was in with my dad, and sort of how I was or wasn't capable of picking up exactly where we were and what was going on, and sort of compartmentalizing what I wanted versus what was the reality.
When we talk about type of caregivers, we often think about a spouse or a partner, but there's also, this phrase of the sandwich generation.
Big time.
You would have been in, where you're a new mom, you're caring for your newborn, and then your parents, your father is dying or is very sick, and a lot of people go through this in the sandwich generation, where their parents get elderly and frail and need more help, but they're also they're a taxi service to their teenage kids, or whatever it might be in parenting. I'm the taxi service right now. That's why I say that.
For sure. And I mean, that's such a reality of so many of our caregivers. I think the thing I was wondering with you was, given your personal experiences and also being an oncologist yourself, dealing with this particular disease of lung cancer or group of diseases, has it changed the way that you navigate the emotional side of patient care? Does it make you approach things differently now, having experienced that toll that it takes on your life personally? Has it changed anything for you?
Yeah, I think it has. I think it's changed. So most obviously for me, it's changed the way I speak to people who have lung cancer, who are coming towards the end of life. And of course, when we set out to treat people with lung cancer, an increasing proportion of patients are now cured of lung cancer, which is great. And we're diagnosing more cases at an early stage because of things like screening coming along. So that's great. And even in people with stage 4 lung cancer, there are more treatments. So more and more people are living for much longer than we ever used to see. So there's a lot of hope and positivity in lung cancer. But we still have to recognize that it is still the deadliest cancer in Canada, and about a quarter of people dying of cancer is because of lung cancer. And I think what's changed for me is, I think when people are really coming towards the last period of their life, whether that's days, weeks, or months, um, I'm able to take that personal experience and I hope at least more effectively advise people um, on navigating that last period of their life. And because you can't tell people what to do because it's so personal and so different for everybody, and
Mhm.
everybody's situation is a bit different. But there are some themes that can come out, and I hope I'm better at doing that now.
What does it mean to you to walk shoulder to shoulder with your patients, and how does that play into sort of like staying present for families during both the good and the very, very devastating moments?
I love that phrase, shoulder to shoulder. Firstly, it's non-confrontational.
Yeah.
It's not a physician sitting on one side of the table and a patient facing them opposite. We talking to one of my patients yesterday, who's actually a retired physician himself, and we were. So if he's listening, he'll know exactly who he is. But we were talking about the relationship between patient and physician, and if a willingness to for both to be a bit vulnerable, and so for me to share stories about my life, or not because it's about me, but it's about building a relationship, and so quite literally, often when I'm leaving a consultation room, I'll walk out with the patient and we walk back out towards the sort of the waiting room together, shoulder to shoulder, and then we just have a little chit chat. Um, and I think just those kind of little moments, they don't take that much time. Um, Walking shoulder to shoulder means not just looking at your blood test results and the scan results and being very methodical about the exact treatment regimen and doses and the kind of sciencey bit of medicine. Now, of course, that's all important and has to be done properly, but it's also about understanding people's hopes and fears and desires and aspirations.
That absolutely makes sense to me. I love that idea where you're saying it's that such a very, having been in those meetings where it's that very much literally and figuratively that feeling of one person on the other side of the table from me. It's a powerful image that you're putting forward, and one that I appreciate very much. Are you a caregiver feeling overwhelmed, isolated, or in need of support? The SCALE program from the Ontario Caregiver Organization is here to help. SCALE, also known as Supporting Caregiver Awareness, Learning, and Empowerment, is a free program designed for caregivers like you. With one-on-one coaching, group counseling sessions, and practical tools, you can find a balance between your caregiving responsibilities and personal needs. Maintaining your mental health is a crucial step in the caregiver journey. Join us as we unpack difficult emotional experiences related to caregiving and provide meaningful strategies to enhance your mental wellness. Visit ontariocaregiver.ca/SCALE to learn more. Now, back to our episode. Do you find for you that there is a particular patient or caregiver story that really has stood out or stuck with you, or that has shifted the way that you think about care or advocacy when it comes to lung cancer?
There are lots. We have busy jobs, so I've looked after probably thousands of people with lung cancer. And do I remember the intricate details of everybody? No, I don't. Are there some people who will go with me to my grave? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And some of those stories are people that inspired me in some way, or I found maybe very difficult, or was just awful situations. I could tell you about Kayla, and Kayla would be happy for me to share her name and her husband, Jordan. Kayla was 28.
Wow.
When she had lung cancer. She'd just given birth. She had a very rare type of lung cancer. And I remember just about everything about it. I remember getting the phone call from a surgeon saying, please come today. Like, please don't put her in the normal queue. And I remember which room she was in the hospital. Family were there. I remember the conversations we had. And Kayla has passed away a few years ago. And she was awesome and just inspiring for lots of people in our patient support group, for me. And she then wanted to volunteer. She and Jordan wanted to volunteer for Lung Cancer Canada. And so we had to have a very careful discussion. I said, well, look, I'm the president of Lung Cancer Canada. I'd love to have you come and help us, but I'm also your doctor. And you know, that's two separate kind of relationships. So we kind of did this dance, and then Jordan has continued to fundraise, and we have a thing called Kayla's Angel Fund, which is a pot of money that we use to be very practical things like parking passes and just stuff like that.
I can understand that. And I think what that brings to mind is I think people have a very, when it comes to lung cancer and it comes to fundraising and it comes to, and maybe this is a discussion that you've had before or possibly, but I feel like sometimes people want to put lung cancer in a very specific bucket, you know what I mean, of who has lung cancer. Right. There's a stigma that is attached to that. I think that a lot of people with other forms of cancer perhaps do not encounter. On a personal level, I would love to get your feelings on that.
We did a campaign, actually, Lung Cancer Canada, together with the Lung Health Foundation. The campaign was called The Wrong Question.
I know what that question is.
Yeah, exactly. I don't even need to say what the question is. And there's a website, thewrongquestion.ca.
Yeah.
And, you know, spell it out for people who are listening who aren't kind of picking up on the hint here. But the idea is when somebody gets diagnosed with lung cancer, the first question you should ask them as someone who loves them or a friend or a family member is, you know, how are you feeling, or, you know, how can I help you, or, you know, what can I do to support you? It shouldn't be the wrong question, which is, you know, oh, I didn't know you smoked. And you know, the reality for lung cancer is that tobacco, for sure, it's the major risk factor for getting lung cancer. But as another young woman who passed away of lung cancer in our center had said, you know, and she had a big campaign as well, said, like, if you've got lungs, you can get lung cancer. And you know, people can get lung cancer whether they are actively using tobacco, if they've worked hard and quit, and it's really difficult because the tobacco companies aren't your friend in this. They will make their products as addictive as possible.
Exactly.
Or if you've never smoked. So non-smokers, never smokers, current smokers can get lung cancer. No one's breaking the law here either. Even if it's a social stigma. Smoking cigarettes is a legal activity, which has for a long time. And I think sometimes in lung cancer advocacy, when we talk about tobacco, we've got to be really careful because sometimes, you know, we want to say, well, look, you can get lung cancer if you've never smoked. And then we highlight people who've never smoked who get lung cancer. But in doing so, we're almost stigmatizing ourselves because we're saying, well, you know, look at this poster child, they never smoked, they didn't deserve this. And is that sort of, then we're sort of underhand saying, well, and the other person did.
Right. It's a complex thing. It really is.
It's complex, but the bottom line is, you know, if you've got lungs, you can get lung cancer. And, you know, when I moved to Canada, Michelle, I discovered butter tarts.
A lot of people love butter tarts.
Yeah, I love butter tarts. But, you know, we have a second cup in our hospital here that I go and get coffee at. And you know, they put the calorie count now by everything, whether it's like a date square or a butter tart or a croissant or whatever. So, you know, it's like 500 calories in a butter tart. And so I don't eat butter tarts so much these days. But bottom line, though, is I used to eat butter tarts fairly regularly, and if I then ended up in the hospital with a heart attack, I don't think I would have been stigmatized because firstly, no one would have known. But even if I had, it's like, would you really say I'm sorry? You're not worthy of my compassion because you ate butter tarts. And someone else at Lung Cancer Canada or a volunteer or had a story, and they say, look, I don't mourn the death of my grandmother any less because she died of lung cancer.
Precisely. Thank you for that. That's a little bit of a personal question from me, but I'm sure a lot of our listeners would want to hear that as well. Have your personal experiences with your family and with your wife's aunt that did have lung cancer taught you anything about the gap between what caregivers need and what the healthcare system currently provides? I'm sure this is sort of this is a hot button issue, of course, and every person that's a doctor is going to be on either side of things at one point in their life. You know what I mean? So what is that? Did that enlighten anything in particular for you at all?
I think, if anything, it made me realize that the healthcare professionals really can play an important role in helping families communicate with each other. Some families I observe when there's a diagnosis of a life-threatening illness, and they are wonderful. They are loving, supportive, open, humorous, honest, brave in the conversations they're going to have. And those almost universally goes better. Even if the ultimate outcome is somebody's passing away from cancer, the whole process, their quality of life, their quality of death, the grieving of their family is better. I don't know your family and intricately your family model, and you don't know my family model, but every family is different. And so we also see those families where, I'm not going to tell them, or there's been an estrangement, or people just haven't thought ahead about kind of the practical things to think about when you're facing something like this, or maybe they have, but they haven't told anyone, or just. I think physicians, and no, it doesn't have to be physicians, the healthcare team, doctors, nurses, social workers, we can help, I think, caregivers and family members prepare when there's a serious illness.
I can relate to that. I think what I can say about my personal information is there were some key pieces of information that were kept from me because of the fact that I think that I had just had a baby. And I think everybody sort of wanted to make sure that I was staying as sane as possible. Those key pieces of information would have been really helpful in sort of in my approach to the situation. So I think I am absolutely on board with what you're saying there. I think it would have prepared me that openness to ask better questions, to, to process information a little bit better. I understand it was all done with love. I completely understand. But I think in retrospect, it would have been more helpful for me.
It's tricky, isn't it? Because often these things are done with love. They're not trying to well, sometimes it is deliberately trying to hide information. Or there's some denial involved, maybe. Usually it's done with love, but then that's where we have to tread a fine line, I think, from my role in this, because I don't know family dynamics and family history, and whether Uncle Bill has been terrible in the past, or cousin Joey, and et cetera, et cetera. But I think there is a role to kind of tread that line and say, these are some things you could think about as a family. And I'll often say, families that are able to have these difficult discussions together often find it easier and have a bit more peace moving forwards.
That makes sense. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the role of caregivers in patient advocacy, something, again, that touches on both your professional and your personal experience. What role do you think that caregivers play not only in supporting the patient, but also advocating within the healthcare system for them, and how crucial is their voice in that treatment process?
Right. So I think there's lots of layers to this, and I think it depends on the patient and what their health is like, and what their capacity is like for doing a lot of this, and then the caregiver, who is the caregiver. There are some very practical advocacy things, which could be as simple as, look, I'm going to phone the CT scan department for you to see if we can figure out a better appointment time, because you live an hour away and the scan's been booked at 6 a.m.
Yeah.
Making it up. But so there's very practical things that a caregiver can do to intervene. So I'm not talking about support like saying, "Oh, I'll go to the drugstore and pick up your prescriptions." It's more, where can I advocate for you for it to be easier for you to, and so it could be simple things like helping with scheduling appointments. Also, coming to appointments is often very helpful. It was difficult during COVID, and I think one of the big things we found during COVID, when family members were not allowed to come, and they could be there on FaceTime. It's not quite the same, and the internet goes down, or they don't have a smartphone, or but having a caregiver present, you can record the conversations. I would request that if you're going to record, just ask.
Yes.
I think the law says you can just record. I think, but you only need one side of consent. But I think those can be helpful. Two sets of ears, listening to sometimes quite complex issues, and physicians, despite all the communication skills training we may have, we're also a spectrum of ability, and so some are better communicators than others. So I think advocating, asking questions, those kind of things can be helpful. Then there's a whole other advocacy level that we could get into if you want, which is then, well, how do you advocate more, not just for your loved one, but how do you get involved in advocacy as a for your community, for our society, for lung cancer patients? Because that's something an organization like Lung Cancer Canada, or the caregiver associations, or Zuma, or Lung Health Foundation, et cetera, et cetera.
In Ontario, there are almost 4 million caregivers, just like you, who provide physical or emotional support to a family member, partner, friend, or neighbor. The I Am a Caregiver toolkit from the Ontario Caregiver Organization is designed to support you with practical tools to help you stay organized, manage stress, and navigate your journey. Now available in 5 new languages: Cantonese, Mandarin, Tamil, Punjabi, and Tagalog. The toolkit makes it easier than ever to access the resources you need. You don't have to do this alone. Visit ontariocaregiver.ca/managing-care/toolkits to download your free copy today. Well, I think to your point, there's advocacy and sort of getting involved and participating in those organizations, but there's also being aware of those organizations as resources, which is so crucial. So when you're up in the middle of the night Googling things, what I mean? Like having that trusted resource, whether it's Lung Cancer Canada, whether it's the Ontario Caregiver Organization, I think those are really important touch points to have. Yeah. And I can imagine over the years, you've seen caregivers, obviously at their most vulnerable and at their most resilient, at their best of times and their worst of times, probably. But what advice would you give to a caregiver in those moments where they're struggling to find the ability to advocate for their loved ones, or, how can they effectively, create change for the better in the patient experience as well as their own as a caregiver?
Yeah, it's a difficult question, Michelle, because it's so different for every family. I guess if I was trying to have some overarching themes. Caregivers who try and do it all, and they want to, and it's not that they don't, they want to do it all, but it's okay to share the load. It's you don't have to do everything, and sometimes you will be a better caregiver if you share the load with other family members or with professional caregivers, whether it's personal support workers or social workers, nursing, physicians, etc., or support from organizations like Lung Cancer Canada or Ontario Caregiver, etc. So I think the one thing I would say is you don't have to do it all yourself, and it can be, it's no good if you get sick yourself.
Absolutely. And to come back to that, it's one of those situations where when someone you love is diagnosed with lung cancer, it can when you find yourself in that caregiving situation, in any sort of situation, it can hit you all at once. And there can be feeling, I kind of referenced that middle of the night Googling of things. Mm-hmm. There was a feeling that I had to become this overnight expert on this. I'm sure you've encountered people like me before, but I was like, I'm gonna fix this. I'm gonna find the answer. I'm gonna fix this. There's a lot to know. Obviously, I'm not even going to guess how many years you went to school and then were a resident and then, you know what I mean? There's no way I can be that expert in that situation. But, this disease brings a number of incredibly different decisions when it comes to treatment options, quality of life, end of life care. How can a caregiver better equip their self to navigate these high stakes conversations? You know what I mean? Because for me, it's like, okay, I have to learn all the things all at once so I can be that person that does it all, and I can make all the decisions or help advise on how to make the decisions. What would you say?
Yeah, well, maybe that's the first thing is you don't have to. You don't have to learn it all.
Thank you for that.
And someone wiser than me once said that like a consultation is like the meeting of two experts. So I can tell you all about lung cancer. I can tell you about prognosis, the causes, the treatments, the potential side effects, all of those things. And you, as the patient or the caregiver, depending on what your role is in this, you're the expert in how you feel. You're the expert in what's important to you. And so when we're trying to then make decisions, the years of doctor says, patient does, thankfully are long gone. We're doing this together, but we're each coming to it with our own expertise. And so as a caregiver, sometimes there's a pressure to be an expert in something that you're not an expert in. And likewise, a physician might say, well, I think you should do this, but I'm not an expert in your family and what's important to you. And, and so you have to ask what's important to you. And sometimes you have to explain, well, what do I mean when I say what's important to you? Well, what are your plans for the next 3 months, for example? Is there something going on? Like, have you got a trip, or is there a wedding or a graduation, or is there a grandchild coming? And, I was chatting to someone today who's been struggling with chemotherapy. We were just kind of umming and ahhing about whether we take a little break or not. And then his caregiver just piped in and said, well, we're getting married next week. And I was like, well, okay. Well, would you like to feel the best you can on your wedding day? Okay. So we changed our plans because, I can then work with that. I can work with that with making a medical plan around your personal plans, which the caregiver told me, we're getting married. The patient hadn't told me.
That's helpful to know. So
it's helpful to know.
I love your approach to this. I love your approach that you're, obviously you're an expert in what you're an expert in, and the patient and the caregiver are experts in who they are and their life situation, right?
Right. And we can't pretend to be an expert in the other person's job.
Yes.
We can try and understand.
Yes.
So you might read a bit about lung cancer and get a sense of that to try and have a better understanding.
Yeah.
or my wife's aunt, Gail was her name. She'd be happy for that to be shared. She had me to just help explain things
For sure.
to her. But I wouldn't be able to tell you, well, how are you going to prioritize juggling being a new mom with your dad being sick, and I don't know if you were working or if you were on a mat leave or if you've got other kids that you've happened to juggle with. So it's that openness to have a conversation about what's important.
For those caregivers, and you talked about that, like, we talk about caregiver burnout a lot. For those that do feel like they're running on empty, what would you say to remind them? You've touched on this already, about the importance of caring for themselves as well.
Yeah, and you know what? It's difficult, and it's very easy for me sitting here to say, make sure you get some sleep and make sure you eat, and if you can exercise or get outside and walk the dog, or then do that, and they'll come back and laugh in my face and say, "You kidding me? Like, I can't leave my loved one because they're on an oxygen tank and they fall over or whatever it might be." And so, like, I don't mean to. We're not here to pretend that it's easy being a caregiver and there's easy solutions, because there aren't. But some practical things, so there are groups out there who can help you. Ontario Caregiver, for example, Lung Cancer Canada, and other organizations. So it's worthwhile having a look, because there are resources available within your local, wherever you are locally. So there may well be resources. So, for example, in Ottawa, we have our psychosocial oncology program. Social workers, dietitians, physiotherapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, even, not just for the patient, but for the family members as well. So there might be resources right there for you. Sometimes people in your circle as a caregiver will say, "Oh, they're around to help. Just tell me what you need." I find it's difficult when people say that, because human nature, we don't like to ask for help. Sometimes we see it as a personal failure that I've had to ask for help. I personally, I've switched in the last few years, that I think asking for help is a sign of wisdom.
I agree.
I've completely plagiarized this from Louise Penny, who, I don't know if you've read any of her novels. She writes murder mystery novels.
I have not.
And I teach my residents this. The hero of her books is Armand Gamache. He's a police officer, chief inspector, and he teaches at the police academy, and he says 4 things you need to know, or 4 things you need to be able to say on the path to wisdom. I don't know. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. And will you help me? And I think maybe this applies to life, doesn't it? But I think in caregivers, if it's difficult, it's okay to say, "I don't know what to do." And it's okay to say, "Please, will you help me?" Practically, what that might look like is when your friends or your family or the neighbor says, "Just let me know whatever you need," it's worthwhile, if you're somebody offering help to a caregiver, be more specific. Don't say, "Just let me know."
Do you need me to cook a meal?
Don't even say, "Do you need me to cook a meal?" You say, "I'm cooking a meal for you and I'm bringing it around on Saturday."
Yeah.
"I'm going to the grocery store this afternoon anyway. I'd like to pick up some groceries for you. What do you need? Would you like me to come next Monday morning and sit with Ted so you can do what the heck you want? Go to the store, go for a walk, take the dog out, go and have a nap." So be sort of purposeful
and specific
in how you help people. And if you're a caregiver who's not, you're okay asking for help, or you're learning that, make a list. So when people say, "What can I do to help?" you say, "Well, actually, what? I'd love a ride. I'd love a ride to the appointment next week. Or I'd love, if you're going to the store, could you pick me up some milk and some eggs?"
That's very good advice. I wanted to talk a little bit more about your role with Lung Cancer Canada, and specifically resources for caregivers.
Yeah.
As someone who both works with Lung Cancer Canada and also hosts their podcast, you do a lot of things. You're a very busy man. What are the most common concerns that you hear from caregivers specifically related to lung cancer, and how is the organization helping to address those?
So we could do better. I have to admit, we can always do better. Lung Cancer Canada has been around for over 20 years now. Lungcancercanada.ca. That's the website, and our mission is support, awareness, education. So support for family members, support for patients with lung cancer and their family members, awareness about lung cancer, that it's the most common cancer, that it's stigma and things like that, and education. So we put on events for family members and to come to with patients. There are support groups. There are one-on-one support, sort of peer-to-peer support opportunities. There are a lot of materials that are available that can give some practical help. What we don't have, and what I'd love to see us have, is a sort of 24-hour hotline. At some point, we don't have the resources for that, and that comes back a little bit to lung cancer and the stigma. It's difficult. But lung cancer charities historically, it's been harder than some other cancer charities. So harder to raise funds. But there's a lot of those kind of things. And actually, if people were interested in, they wanted to go to the website, lungcancercanada.ca, there's a lot of material on there that you might find useful or interesting, but also some ways that you can get help or give help.
Are there any particular resources that Lung Cancer Canada has that you find caregivers often need but overlook?
Ooh, that's a good question. What things that we offer that people don't use?
Yeah, or that they're not aware is available or not aware that they need as much, perhaps. And if there isn't anything, that's okay.
I think the thing that I would love caregivers to be able to do, and I might give you a different website actually, and I'm just going to pull it up while we're talking here. But when people are diagnosed with a life-threatening illness, so this could be lung cancer, it could be any cancer, it could be it could be Lou Gehrig's disease, it could be anything really. Having conversations about what your wishes are, what your priorities are, is so helpful. So we call that advanced care planning. And advanced care planning is not an answer. It's not a set of instructions. It's a toolkit of, what are some kinds of things that it will be helpful to think about. Mm-hmm. And I would like to equip caregivers more to help their loved ones navigate through this. Because if you're a lung cancer patient and you're tired and stressed and anxious and you just don't have energy, then your caregiver is somebody who can really help you navigate through this. And again, it could be advanced care planning comes under lots of different buckets. There's legal issues. Do you have a will? Is it up to date? Is someone appointed as your power of attorney? I mean, that's often the caregiver. But there's also, spiritual things. Are you someone of faith? Is this a time you want to engage with your minister or your priest or get support from your church or your mosque or your synagogue? Or it could be your bucket list. And people have told me all sorts of things when we talk about bucket lists. That they want to go ice fishing one more time, or they want to take a trip somewhere, or often it's just being with family. Could be practical things. Like if I know that I'm not going to be living for much longer and I'm the person in my house that pays the bills, well, I'm going to have to teach my wife how to pay the bills. And, I learned that from my mother and my sister-in-law when her dad suddenly died unexpectedly. His wife had no clue about the visa bills and how to pay the credit card off. So it could be very practical
Mm.
things like that. Some people, if you've, I don't know, Michelle, if you would want to share or not about when your father passed away, had he told people what he wanted? Gail,
Can, can I
when she died, we had a sense of what she wanted, but it hadn't been clear when we were planning. My wife was helping her uncle. They didn't have kids. So my wife was helping her uncle plan the funeral and a memorial. And we knew certain elements, but it wasn't entirely clear. And it was lovely. The whole ceremony was just beautiful. Um, but some people have that whole thing planned out, and then they're
we
not
did not.
leaving. You did not.
No.
So,
No, it
yeah.
was
So,
yeah.
so I think caregivers could be, if again, it's not easy. It's not easy to even bring up this topic.
That's the
Some
hardest
people,
thing because you don't want to say it out loud, right?
right?
Because saying it out loud makes it feel real, even if it already feels real. For some reason, you don't want to upset the other person. You don't want to upset the person that's your loved one, that's the patient. And it also makes it a little bit more real. For me, there was a fear of having that conversation. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And we can
Such a
help with that.
fear.
So
Yeah.
groups like Lung Cancer Canada or your healthcare professionals, nurses, that's one of our jobs, is to try and encourage people to say, look, I hope that your treatment goes really well and you live for years. But you also know that you've just been diagnosed with a very serious illness, and we don't know exactly what the future holds,
Mm.
and things maybe go well, maybe they don't. And so what do you need to do so you don't have regrets and that your family don't have regrets? And so we can help that, but it is difficult, and there's
Yeah.
no getting away from it. They're difficult conversations, but honestly, time and time and time again, when I've seen families who have been able to have these conversations, it's so much easier for them. It's so much easier for their loved ones.
That is very good advice. I know we touched on the resources that Lung Cancer Canada has, but for, you know, those that might be feeling very overwhelmed or isolated, what specifically could you say in terms of emotional or community support? There are support groups that are available through Lung Cancer Canada?
Yes, so I would say that probably for lung cancer care, we have some support groups, but they're very sort of regional, and we do
Hmm.
some online stuff. A lot of the support groups are more for patients than caregivers, and so that's something that we need to build up as a charity. Um, I think maybe like groups like Ontario Caregiving Association, which are in place just for caregivers, are great resources. And if people are in other provinces, I think there are other. I don't think every province has one, but a number of provinces do have organizations like
Hmm.
that.
And of course, if you're a podcast person, which you might be because you're listening to this podcast.
I have a podcast. Yeah, so my podcast is called Lung Cancer Voices, talking about patients who are going to go with me to my grave. The podcast was initially funded by a lung cancer patient and her family,
Oh, that's so wonderful.
and
Okay.
she's still alive. She's had two different lung cancers and survived them both. Um, and that and She and her family supported the podcast.
It's lovely.
So the podcast is aimed for patients and caregivers. It's not aimed at a medical audience, and there's a range of things which people might find helpful. So some of the podcasts we do are when I interview other oncologists or researchers about the latest, lung cancer
Hmm.
research or the latest treatments that are coming. Um, but we've also done podcasts, about caregiving. We've had podcasts, lots of podcasts with patients and their family members about their stories. Often I'll interview a patient on their own, but often I'll interview them and their caregiver or their loved one, and we get both perspectives. And there's other things that we've done on. Gosh, there's been podcasts about medical assistance in dying. We've had podcasts about cannabis. We've had podcasts about, gosh, well, I'm going to lose track. But anyway, it's all there on the
It's
Lung
all
Cancer
there.
Canada website. But yeah,
Wonderful.
it's a lot of fun doing it, actually.
Wonderful. For our caregivers that are listening today that might be at the beginning of this difficult journey, what would you say to them in terms of how they can take that first step in seeking support, whether it's through Lung Cancer Canada or another avenue?
Yeah, great idea. So yeah, the first thing is I would suggest that probably you first look right where you are, for that local support. So if you're just starting out in a lung cancer journey, most cancer centers will have something like a psychosocial oncology program where there will be people in your area with all of the local context of what's available. So I think that's one thing. And then the second thing, and you have to do this as a caregiver with your loved one who has lung cancer, and agree on, you don't necessarily want to shout it from the roofs. Oh, look at me, I've got lung cancer, or I've got. But just think about who is your sort of trusted circle that you are willing to share and be open with, and you might just find that having just a slightly, if it's not just two of you, that this, whether it's kids or siblings or close friends or neighbors, that if you just have the circle being a little bit bigger than two people, that might be helpful to you.
It's been really an absolute pleasure talking to you today, Paul. I can't thank you enough for the insight that you've brought to this conversation, professionally and personally. And it's been, like I said, it's been an episode that I've been looking forward to for quite some time, because just it touches so much in terms of my personal story as well. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. You can access more details and support services on our website, ontariocaregiver.ca. Until next time, I'm Michelle Jobin, and you've been listening to Time to Talk, a podcast for caregivers. We hope you have a wonderful day.